Good morning, everybody. Good morning. All right. So, what shall we talk about today? I have gospel resistance up there. Did you know that in the state of Louisiana, they have decided to put the Ten Commandments back in the classrooms, and there's a big to-do about that. Now, I want to talk about that. By the way, I sent out an article that I read. Did everybody get, okay. Because I never know. For all I know, it all goes into the ether in a giant spam trash can somewhere. So I'm not really going to talk about that, but I'm going to build on that, okay? So some questions that we want to ask are, the appropriateness, why you would want or not want the Ten Commandments in classrooms. How our society is trying to be fair and how what they're trying to do is not fair at all. And I want to give an important understanding and justification for what it is that we try to do in a Christian school, okay? All of this is related. So, should the Ten Commandments be a part of public education? It's oftentimes when you listen to the legal arguments and even the judges, Supreme Court judges and so forth, when they talk about this, the arguments often go like this. We can't have religion in public schools, but we could have the Ten Commandments provided that the emphasis is entirely upon the cultural aspect of them and we completely ignore or overlook the religious significance of these things. In fact, I think it was Judge Scalia who quipped kind of bitterly that in the court's jurisprudence regarding what we do with religious symbolism in public places, he says, apparently the court's opinion here is that we can have religious symbols in public places provided that they are divorced from any religious significance at all. And then so he says, then what's the point? Okay, what is the point? For many people, the Ten Commandments mean what? They're rules for life, okay? And the problem with taking the Ten Commandments out of public schools is you take the rules out of public schools, and now the kids go wild and tear the whole place to pieces. Obviously, that's not quite how it works. But is the most important thing about the Ten Commandments the rules that they prescribe for how we are to live? People who understand the Ten Commandments only that way do not understand what their real significance is. This is not really a list of do's and don'ts, believe it or not. That's the least important. I mean, it looks like it's kind of framed that way, but it's not. I mean, just stop and think about the absurdity of having, if God is going to tell us 10 things that are really important, do you think he's going to waste an entire thing to tell us not to murder? I mean, really? All of these 10 commandments are about much, much more than simply what's there. And I'm not talking about an exegesis of the text itself. I mean, do not murder means do not murder. I mean, even stop and think about that. How helpful is that commandment? I mean, as a commandment, how helpful is that? What is murder? Murder is illegal killing. Okay? So to tell somebody you may not illegally kill, that's sort of like saying you should not do what you should not do. Do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't define what murder is. It just says you shouldn't kill when you shouldn't kill. And murder means you shouldn't have killed. Something like that. It's not very helpful. But it's not meant for that. It's not meant to tell us that we shouldn't murder. Every society says you shouldn't murder. They may have made different definitions of murder, what constitutes an illegal killing. What's more importantly is that they may have very different understandings of what a human life is and why or why one would not want to kill. Okay, so the Ten Commandments are the least important thing about them is the particular rules that we see there. This defines a worldview, a total understanding of the world in which we live and our mutual responsibilities and duties to one another and to God. Okay? You can take that out of public education, but if you take that out of public education, you are taking out a whole lot more than rules. You are taking out the entire substructure of what our life is supposed to be about. You've removed that, okay? It's not going to stay void. It's not going to stay empty. It will be replaced by something else. Now, we talked about this last week, so I'm not going to go into it again, but here's some broad categories of things which the Ten Commandments treat, or which the Judeo-Christian worldview sort of defines for us, and it gives us a package, as I said, of our mutual duties and responsibilities and relationships one to another and to God. I will point out that in the Judeo-Christian worldview, God is central. Okay? There are lots of folks who think the Ten Commandments are perfectly fine, except, and then what will they do? Ten Commandments are perfectly fine in the public schools, except the first 3 commandments are a real problem, or 4, depending on how you number them, because they're all about God, and that is to push God on people. But the Judeo-Christian worldview requires God. You take God out of it, and the rest just doesn't mean what it looks like it means anymore. Okay? So, if you want to take the Ten Commandments out of education, what you are doing is you are taking a whole worldview that Western culture has been built around and our nation has been built around. You are taking that out. You are going to have to replace it with something else. You cannot have an education where you simply don't tell children what anything is about. You can't. Okay. We talked about this last week too. If you want to look at the Word of God in 2 very, very broad aspects. One is just this kind of worldview, the nature of reality, the nature of our mutual responsibilities to one another. There's a God up there in heaven, and we are accountable to Him, and He created us, and we have duties toward one another, and so on. This is this basic life understandings, okay? And then the second thing is what God is up to in the world. And that, last week I made the distinction between a worldview and then the more religious part. The more religious part is referring to what God is up to in the world. This is the world, and to review real quickly, between Jews and Christians, we both Jews and Christians agree on the nature of the world that God has created, the basic relationships and duties of human beings, okay? Where we disagree is what God is up to. We all agree that once upon a time, God was up to raising up Moses and making a people of God and entering into a covenant with them and bringing them into the land of Canaan. That was something that God did in this world that He made, okay? Jews still agree with that. We say, well, that's what God did do, but now what He is doing is something else. And now what He's doing is about Christ and His kingdom, and He's building the kingdom to the ends of the earth. And that's what God is doing. So if you talk to a Jew and ask a Jew just general questions about the nature of reality and our obligations to one another, they're not going to have much different to say than what you and I would have to say. Orthodox Jewish commentary on modern American society is very similar to Christian commentary on modern American society. What's right and what's wrong with it, okay? Because it's talking about a worldview. But if you're going to ask them what is God up to, the Christian is going to say, Christ is Lord, He has a kingdom, He's assembling people, He is going to return, that's what God is up to. And they're going to say, no, we're still waiting for the Messiah to come, and we don't know exactly how that's going to work, but we don't believe that Jesus is what God was up to. But as for everything else, we agree on essentially what God made and our role in it, how we fit in it. The important relationship between this worldview and then the more specific thing, what God's, for us Christians, what do we call what God is up to? We'll call it the gospel, okay? That Christ's incarnation, His atonement, His resurrection, ascension, his return, and the building of the kingdom of God. That is the strictly religious stuff, what God is doing in this world. The worldview that is taught is meant to protect that. Look, the Ten Commandments enshrine a worldview. They are not just 10 rules. Okay? They enshrine an entire conception of the way things are. The purpose of this worldview, or I shouldn't say the purpose of it, but a purpose of it, and an important function of it, is to provide support and protect the preaching of the gospel. Remember, we can't preach the gospel in an atheistic world. I mean, you can preach it, but when you preach the gospel in an atheistic world, the atheist is going to have to abandon the atheism to consider Jesus. Okay? So you are not just adding Jesus to their life. You are completely transforming their life. If you're going to bring Jesus to an atheist, you are not asking them just to believe in Jesus. You are asking them to abandon everything else they believe about the nature of reality and then replace it with the worldview that Jesus, that is consistent with Jesus, and then we can tell you about Jesus. But as long as the atheist says there is no God, then it's sort of pointless to talk about Jesus rising from the dead. You agree? It's just a waste of time. So this is my point last week when I said you can't just preach Jesus alone. It might seem like it if you're... Consider how our culture was, maybe 50 or 60 or 70 years ago, where most people just generally did have a Judeo-Christian worldview, but they didn't go to church. Okay? Well, we still have that today. You'll have lots of people who essentially have a Judeo-Christian worldview, but they don't go to church. They're not religious. And when you approach that person to evangelize them, you might very well just share Jesus. You can do that. You know God exists. Oh yeah, I know that God exists. And he's very angry because when you talk to a person in the Western world about God, they have a certain understanding of that. God is a personal being. God makes rules. God punishes people who violate his rules. He rewards those who keep his rules. God is the judge. Right? In the Western worldview, that's what God is. Eastern religion, that's not the way God is at all. But for in the West, that's God, because that's the God of the Bible. So if you've got somebody who already believes that the God out there and already is suspicious that God is angry with them because they already feel their sinfulness, and then you start talking to them about how actually God is merciful, and let me tell you why, and start talking about Jesus, you are layering your preaching about Jesus upon a whole worldview that they already agree with. That's the way it used to be. You could assume that people knew that there was a God, or at least knew what you were talking about when you talked about God, and when you talked about God, what that meant. And when you said things like sin or judgment, you understood what that meant. You could use shorthand like heaven and hell, and even they knew what that meant, or knew what a commandment was. Okay, all this makes sense for those who have a Judeo-Christian worldview, even if you've never heard of Jesus. If you talk to a Jew and say, do you realize that that is a sin, what you just did? They might very well say, yes, I do, and I did it anyway. Okay, and I hope God will forgive me. Okay? They're speaking the same language as we are. Let me tell you about Jesus. That's why God is going to forgive you. All right, we agree on the worldview. But if you don't agree on a worldview, you got a lot of work to do. If you're going to talk to a Buddhist, about Jesus, you can't just say, well, here's Jesus. If you're going to preach to the Indians during the Western expansion, you couldn't just start talking about Jesus. Their whole conception of the universe was totally different and had no place for a Jesus. I am going somewhere with all this. Well, I hope I'm going somewhere with all of this. Okay. All right. Secularism does not profess to be atheistic or anti-religious. I'm going to talk a little bit more about secularism in a minute, but we live in a culture that fancies itself to be secular, is trying to be secular. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about what that means. But do you agree that for the most part, people in our society would not characterize themselves as anti-religious? Okay? Most people wouldn't say, I'm against religion. What they say is that they are agnostic or trying to be neutral on the question of religion. That's what most people who consider themselves fair-minded, that's what they're trying to be. Neutral and agnostic. In other words, we're not saying that there's no God. There may very well be a God. I'm not an atheist. That's what they're saying. Okay? A lot of this sort of the policy that our sort of public policy generally puts that forward as a secular society, we are going to try to be fair to all different religious views, and the way we're going to do that is that we are going to be agnostic regarding all religion. You know what I mean by agnostic? It means we're not going to say one way or the other. Atheist says there is no God. A believer says there most certainly is, and this is the God. An agnostic says, well, we can't tell him we don't know, so I'm not going to say there is a God or we're not a God. We're just going to try to be fair. Some people don't believe, some people do believe, some people have different conceptions of God. If we're agnostic about it, we're going to say, from a public point of view, we're not going to take a position. If you think that there's no God, that's fine for you. If you think that's fine for you. Okay? Now, where does the rubber hit the road in terms of what the public sort of understanding of secularism, where does that really get impressed upon people? Where does the government's position regarding our secular world really get impressed upon people? Pardon?
The law.
Nope. No, much more profoundly. Public schools. Okay? Public schools. Now, I don't blame them for that. That's what they're going to do. You don't have any choice. When you're teaching, you're going to teach the world you live in. And if the world you live in is a secular world where we're going to be agnostic about whether there's a God or not, note that being agnostic is, I'm not hostile to God at all. I'm not hostile to you as a believer. Okay?
I may mock and ridicule you.
Well, I might, but I don't have to. I can be very respectful, and yet agnostic. So in public schools, we have to be agnostic regarding this. We don't want to be hostile to religion. So we don't want to say, we're atheists here. We don't want to say that. But we can't say, Baptists. We can't say Christian. We can't say people who believe in God. We can't do that. We have to be agnostic about stuff like that. So this is the sort of the American approach to how we deal with religion in a pluralistic society. A pluralistic society is one where lots of people believe lots of different things. Okay? So if we're going to live together, we have to somehow or another manage this, and different people believe different things. So how we're going to do? We're going to adopt a secularist sort of understanding of things, and by being secular, we're going to maintain a middle position of agnosticism and try to straddle and satisfy, or at least don't too much unsatisfy either side, the believers or the atheists. Okay? So what does that look like? I say the myth of neutrality. How many of you have thought that agnosticism sort of fits between belief and atheism? It's what it sounds like. You're believing. You say there is no God. I don't want to take sides with either one because I'm trying to be fair, so I'm going to take a position in the middle. And the position in the middle is, I don't know, I can't say, there's arguments for you, there's arguments for you, and I'm going to occupy the middle ground. Yes, Gloria?
I was raised in a family of agnostics, and my father was very careful to say he didn't know.
Right.
That was his position. He didn't know, but he studied the Bible,
Yep.
and he used to tell me all the wonderful things that the Bible actually taught people, and I think I was very upsetting to him that I chose to have myself baptized.
That's very interesting, because if he's agnostic, why would he be upset?
I don't know. That made me feel like he might have been on the other side of
Yeah, well, I'll explain something else here. Okay, I've titled this "The Myth of Neutrality." This is not what it looks like. I mean, logically, agnosticism is not halfway between faith and atheism. This is really what it looks like. Agnosticism is a form of unbelief. Okay? That's what you have to understand. It's just a form of unbelief. Atheists don't have to believe anything. There's nothing that they're required to believe. So you can be an agnostic and an atheist, practically speaking, it doesn't matter. A theist, somebody who believes in God, has to believe certain things. Okay? I mean, so you are required. There's a positive thing that you must embrace. Atheism just means you don't believe that there's a God. You are not a theist. Agnosticism is a form of that. It doesn't occupy a middle ground. It actually is a kind of atheism. Practically speaking, what is the difference between somebody who says there is no God and somebody who says, I don't know and I can't tell? Practically speaking, what would be the difference between those two?
One can be dissuaded one way or the other one can't.
Well, actually, if you think about that, that sounds like the one's more open-minded. On the other hand, I could make an argument that the agnostic is less open-minded. Because the atheist, let's put it this way, atheism is a very brittle thing. If we can shatter it, then who knows what happens next, okay? Agnosticism is squishy. It just says, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, well, it may just be that they just don't have enough gumption to, or they're too cowardly to take a choice. Now, so it could be that the person is saying that they're agnostic because they're really open-minded and they're considering. But it could be that they're agnostic because they've adopted a position that is unassailable. How do you fight that? Okay, you don't know. Nobody can know. Nobody can know anything. I don't know about God, so there you go.
There's times also where they'll say they're agnostic, but they're atheists, but they'll say one way or another. But I do say that an agnostic person are more non-susceptible to move over to belief.
See, I don't know. What I'm going to say here is agnosticism is a form of unbelief.
Yeah.
Okay?
Absolutely.
It's a form of unbelief. And it makes no demands on you. So when I say what's the difference between an atheist and an agnostic, well, as far as God is concerned, there is no difference because neither one of them makes any demands on you. But at the moment you say, I believe in God, I don't just mean the person who says, I believe in God, but they really don't. I mean the person who is, let's put it this way, a Christian cannot be left unaffected by that. The fact that you believe in this Christian God makes a lot of demands on you. So I can look at your life and say, there's a disconnect between what you say you believe in your life, or I can say, no, they're of a piece. It's clear that you're a Christian. An atheist, there's nothing I can really say there. You don't believe. And beyond that, it doesn't matter. God is a no count to you if you're an agnostic. Who's going to devote their life to something while at the same time saying, I don't know whether the thing is true or not? An agnostic is saying, I don't know whether it's true. Now, consider also very practically speaking, if we're in a classroom with children, and we are always very, very careful whenever the subject of religion comes up, we are always very, very careful to make it very clear that we don't know whether some people believe this and some people believe that, and we don't know which is which, okay? If you're very careful to do that every time the subject of religion comes up, what are you saying about religion? Well, you can't know anyway. The agnostic is not saying, oh, the Christian has as much going for it as the atheist. The agnostic is saying you can't know. That means the Christian is sunk. Okay? Because you can't be a Christian and at the same time say you can't know. You can have lots of questions as a Christian, but you can't have a question as to about whether God is in heaven and Jesus is Lord. If you have those questions, you're not a Christian anymore. Okay? So an agnostic has no problem with that. An agnostic, again, is a form of unbelief. It's just a way of being an atheist. It's a practical atheist. Yes?
It could be something where a person is disappointed in life somehow because, not to get too personal, but my father was an acolyte in the Episcopal Church.
Uh-huh.
His family was Christian, but terrible things happened in his family.
Well, this is true.
And so I think he gave up on it.
Yeah, look, this is true. What I'm talking right now is from a philosophical and logical point of view. The question as to why somebody would be of this position is different. Because there are a lot of people who might characterize themselves as agnostic, but I wouldn't. I would say you're a believer and you're riddled with doubt. Or you're a believer, but you're angry with God. Or something like that. Very weak faith, maybe. Or I might say to an agnostic, you're not a believer at all. You're an atheist. You just want to appear open-minded. I mean, what's going on inside a person is all kinds of things. But I'm just saying from a logical point of view, agnosticism is not the midway point and sort of the fair and balancing point between these two positions. Why that's important is because if we're going to adopt agnosticism as our sort of public policy toward religion, because we're trying to be fair in a pluralistic society, the question is, are we being fair? I'm calling secularism a soft naturalism. We talked a lot about naturalism before. Naturalism, if you can think of naturalism as anti-supernaturalism, okay? So, a naturalist does not believe that anything happens supernaturally. There's no supernatural, which means there's no God, there's no angels, there's no miracles, there's no anything. There's just things doing and acting the way things do and act. Okay, so whatever we can find out in science about how chemicals react or how different materials work or how electricity or electromagnetic radiation propagates through space and all of that kind of stuff, that's the reality. Okay, and everything happens according to those rules. And if anybody tells you anything different, they're pulling your leg. So if we want to say that God created, that's not possible because that would be a supernatural act, and we know that everything happened according to nature. That's why you have this whole idea of evolution. Evolution is an attempt to explain how we got here if everything happened naturally. If there's no supernatural, then it must have happened something like this, and that's where your scientific models come from. Okay? So naturalism is, by definition, atheistic. If everything happens according to nature, then we don't need God for anything. Okay? So if you're a naturalist, and by the way, this has nothing to do with tree hugging. Okay? I'm not talking about somebody who loves nature. We're talking about somebody who believes that everything happens according to natural law only. That is atheistic. That's hard atheism. Whoop, am I out of batteries? Oh, I'm out of throat. That's what you do. I've talked a lot about naturalism as having become very, very influential in our culture. It is not widely believed in its pure form. There are relatively few atheists, real, principled, studied atheists. It is rare that you will find pure, unadulterated atheism promoted publicly or taught in our public schools. You'll find it in the universities. Okay? Universities, you will find it. Elementary, junior high, secondary school, you are not going to find pure atheism like that very often at all. Because it is not popular. It is not happy. Nobody wants to be an atheist unless you've got a number of degrees behind you. So you were not going to find it in that hardened form, but you will find softer forms of it. And when I talk about secularism, in general, what secularism means is our society is going to confine itself with thoughts about the world here. Secularum means earth, okay, as opposed to heaven. So the Christian concept is earth down here and heaven up there, and the two are not separate. And God is very active in this world, and we are to be very mindful of God, okay? A secular understanding is saying we don't know anything about God. We're not necessarily saying there is no God. We're just saying we really can't say anything about that. So, because we are a world, we live in the world, and because we have lots of different beliefs in this world, we are going to limit ourselves to the things that we can see and touch and experience, the things of this world. And so that's what a secular sort of philosophy or approach means. It means our policies, our approaches, our values are all going to be defined only by what's down here, not by what's up there. Okay? That's what that means. Now, that doesn't say there is no up there. There is no God out there. It doesn't say that. But what it does say is, as far as how we're going to live here and the decisions that we're going to make, we are going to act as though there's nothing up there. Do you see what I'm saying? It's a softer version. It sounds practical. We're not saying there's no God. We're just saying, look, there's no way I can convince the Buddhists and the atheists and this and that. I can't convince them all. We don't know. And so we're just going to leave it alone. And we're just going to confine ourselves to what we can know down here. Science becomes king in a secular world because science is, by very definition, all about what's down here and does not make any claims about God, eternity, meaning, purpose, or anything like that. Okay? So when we talk about a secular society, it means our laws, our policies, and all that are geared toward our society and the world today, how we get along here, and that is considered to be kind of a mediating position between people who have deep religious conviction and people who have no religious conviction at all. Okay? It's a soft naturalism. It might allow for, maybe there's a miracle or two here, we can't say. It'll allow for it, but not really. Now, the claim is that secularism is a fair way to manage things in a pluralistic society where not everybody believes the same thing. I mean, if everybody was a Christian, this would not be a problem, would it? No. But if everybody's not a Christian, if we've got people of all different kinds of spiritual beliefs, no beliefs at all, and different organized religions, and lots of unorganized religions, and everybody wants to do their own thing, this is a fair way to do it, because we all live in this world. So no matter what your religion is, you and I can both agree this is the street, this is the grass, this is the road, we're going to drive on the right side of the road, and if you drive on the wrong side of the road, you're going to get, all this, the stuff we can all agree on because it's right there in front of us. That's the claim. It's fair. But it's also agnostic. Secularism is agnostic with respect to religion. It has to be. Do you see that? If it's not, if you say, well, we're going to have a Christian secular society, well, what's that? That's a Christian society. Okay? Christians understand the secular world. We just understand it as the world that God created. But you get a buzzer when you say something like God if you're going to have a truly secular society. Okay. So it's agnostic. So this is how this plays out. We talk about scientific facts. We talk about religious opinions. I mean, in public. Even often in private. But do we not often and casually refer to scientific facts? And I don't mean a data point. Many people will refer to evolution as a scientific fact. It is far from a fact. But almost anything that has a scientific tinge to it, we're likely to refer to as, in some way, factual. This was the whole problem with COVID, is that so much of it was said to be factual, and we were supposed to follow it because this is science, and science is fact. That people got really mad when they found out, wait a minute, that wasn't true. Okay? So science is supposed to be about facts, but religion is about opinion. How many times have you been told you can't argue about religion? Because it's an opinion. You believe that God sent Jesus. This person believes that God is just a a life force pulling the universe together. And this person over here believes that there's lots of gods and lots of spirits and sprites running around. This other person believes that there's really nothing out there at all. You've got your opinion about what this is about, and I've got mine. And who can argue? Who can say? Who can win? What experiment can we do to determine whether the Christians are right or the Buddhists are right? But note that. If even to say a thing like that, what am I implying? If there was a way to find out, science would be the way. There'd have to be an experiment. Okay. When you say, and casually refer to scientific facts and religious opinions, okay, Christianity seems flaky. Because Christianity is a bunch of opinions. Now, have you said that? No. I might even say, a lot of people have lots of different religious opinions. And I personally am a Christian. And I believe very strongly that that's the best of all the religions out there. But what have I also said? It nevertheless is an opinion. I didn't say that. I might even disagree if you put it back to me that way. But I've left it out there for you to interpret it that way. Christianity is going to be lumped with every other religion, and all religions are opinion. Some opinions, are we all entitled to our opinions? Are all opinions as good as every other opinion? Okay, so we can take all the massive religions and heap them all up together, and we can start sorting through them, and we can say they're all opinions. Some of these opinions are better than others. That's true. But we've also relegated all of them to opinion. You can't know. Why do we do that? Because you can't know. We're trying to make a mediating position, and a mediating position means we can't say for sure. We're agnostic on the issue of religion. That's why we have to call these opinions. You're allowed to believe it. We're not telling you can't believe that, but you have to accept that that's your opinion, and other people have different opinions, and so when you put it all together, Christianity starts to look pretty flaky compared to the people who put somebody on the moon. Yes? Because science does things, and religion is opinion. I can argue hard on that. That science by itself rots the soul, and Christianity uplifts the soul, and if you don't think the soul matters, then I guess you're going to discount that. But it seems to me that Christianity has done an awful lot for human life. And science does a lot for human life in a very narrow area, but it can also rot the soul, if that's all you got. Okay, so do you see how, if we're going to take that so-called mediating position, we're going to be agnostic on the question of religious truth, how that makes Christianity seem weak, mushy, fake, and flaky? Okay. I have encountered this many times, where people are surprised that there is a body of knowledge that goes along with the Christian faith. In other words, that there is definition to Christianity. That Christians believe this, this, and this, and even though you might say, but they differ, they have all these different opinions, there are theme and variations when you look at the differing opinions. But a lot of people look at, not just Christianity, but all religion, but Christianity particularly, it's all just a matter of taste. Why do I go to the Baptist church? Because I like the Baptist church. What's the difference between the Baptist church and the Episcopalians? I don't know. Episcopalians are more uptight. That would be it. How many people jump from denomination to denomination and have no idea what the difference is between them? Why don't they know? Because it's not important. Why isn't it important? Because there's no body of knowledge here where you can be right or wrong. It's not like studying geology, where everybody better know these things about rocks. And if you don't know these things about rocks, then you're just not a geologist. There are things that every Christian has got to know because every church teaches this. And if you don't do that, then you're just off in la-la land believing whatever you want. There is a body of knowledge. And just because there's lots of arguments and disagreements, even stop and think about that. We have arguments and disagreements among Christians. What does that imply? There is a body of knowledge to argue over. But there are many people who say, we should never argue about religion. How come? They'll want to say, because we should love one another. Well, what they really mean is, what are you arguing about opinion for? You like it this way, you like it that way. What difference does it make? We're talking about religion here. We're not talking about facts. This is the way people talk. This is the way people talk in public. This is the way you're allowed to talk in public. Listen to me. This is the way you're allowed to talk in public. You can say things like that. Now, there may be people in the audience rolling their eyes because they don't agree with you, but you're not going to be booed. But the moment you get up there and say, well, no, Christianity is the right way, you got problems. But you can say, look, I'm a Christian, and I think that this is really, really wonderful, and other people might have different opinions too. What's important is that we all believe something. The crowd goes wild, okay? Because you're just open-minded and open-hearted and everything else. All right, so the moment we try to take this secularist, agnostic middle ground, remember, we're not really taking a middle ground. It's a form of unbelief. It just sounds more open. The moment we take that agnostic position, Christianity all of a sudden becomes just a pile of opinions that people believe because they want to believe it. You want to believe that there's a heaven. You want to believe that there's a God up there. And maybe there is. And you're welcome to believe that. I tell you folks, I did not go to school as long as I did to be told that in the end it's all about my opinion. There are right and wrong answers. And we're going to have arguments among Christians precisely because there are right and wrong answers, and we Christians care. Okay? If you don't care, then no point in arguing. It's one of the problems with the modern ecumenical movement that wants to join all churches together, is that one of the ways that you do that is you come to agreement on everything. That's hard. So the other way you do that is you stop caring about anything, and then we just all get along. It's a why can't we just all get along? It's the Rodney King approach to ecumenism. If Christians stop caring about what they believe, we can all be in one big happy church. But real Christianity actually asserts things, and that means there's stuff to argue over, and opinions can be changed, and there's a right and there's a wrong, and so on. And even when we have differing opinions, there's a way to say, well, but this is a difference of opinion of a lower order. There are some opinions we will not brook differences on. If somebody comes and says, well, I think Jesus may have just been a good teacher. I don't think he's actually, God incarnate. We're going to say you're a very nice person, but you're not a Christian. Okay. That is beyond the pale of what is acceptable, what is a true fact. Okay. All right, here's something else. The moral center changes in the Judeo-Christian worldview. What is the moral center? God. It can't be any other way. Morality is what it is because God made it the way it is. God will enforce it, and there's no negotiating about this, okay? It finds its ultimate rooting and basis and foundation in God, and that is that. And if you and I want to argue about what God actually said, fine. But it will finally be determined when we figure out what God said. It will never be, well, God said, but who cares? That is not an answer, okay? So morality has as its center God. And God determines what you and I are duty-bound to be and do. It just, as absolutely as He created us, so also He tells us what we are to be about, and there's just no discussion about that. But if you are going to occupy this middle ground, which is not a middle ground, if you are going to adopt this agnostic form of unbelief, You cannot assert that anymore. We can say, here are rules, but we can't say these rules come from God. We can't say they're absolute and non-negotiable. We can't say any of that. Now, all we can do is say, well, there are rules. Where do they come from? Now, what has happened is that the moral center in our society, if we're going to remove God, is going to be replaced from something. We do not have a society where it's everybody for themselves. That's just chaos. That won't happen. But the moral center has moved from God to human beings. Human beings create their morality. Okay? And in particular, what has happened, and I talked some about this in the sermon last week, this expressive individualism, that each of us define for ourselves who we are, and therefore what our obligations and duties are should we choose to accept them. Okay? And that is the way morality is adjudicated today, and the centerpiece is the individual, not God. Note that in a Christian worldview, I don't get to choose my morality or my duties and responsibilities in life. I was born with them already. Before I'd taken my first breath, I was already bound absolutely to God and to love my neighbor, and depending on what circumstances I find myself, I don't get to make any of these choices at all. It's done. Yeah.
Isn't that where the Ten Commandments come in?
Well, absolutely. The Ten Commandments are explaining our relationships and duties to one another as God has defined them. Pardon me?
It's not part of the moral center.
No. No, because the moral center says, I determine what I am, and I determine the world in which I live, and I negotiate with you perhaps on the world in which we live, but when you look to the Ten Commandments, what are you doing? You're looking to God to tell you. Okay? Or you're looking to the church to tell you what God told them.
But you said the moral center is God.
Yes. What I'm saying is it has changed in our society.
So now it's between you and me.
So now it's individual. Morality is something that we negotiate amongst ourselves. And it's not imposed upon all of us by God. We can't say that because we can't say that there's a God. But I can say that you're there and I'm here and we got to get along. So let's negotiate how we're going to get along. I'll tell you what, you don't hurt me, I won't hurt you. What you do on your own is your business. What I do on, is that fair? And you'll say, that's fair. There you go. Okay.
But that doesn't make any sense to me.
Oh, it doesn't make any sense to me either, but that's what, yes, Gloria.
But is that what we're talking about when people bring out the vernacular now of my truth?
Oh, yeah. That's correct. It's my truth because if it's not your truth, then whose truth is it?
Well, I thought Jesus was the truth.
Well, yes. That is a different worldview, okay? The worldview that our society is trying to... Okay, let me put it this way. If we're going to be a secularist, you can't say that's Jesus' worldview. Okay? Because when you start talking about Jesus, you're talking about God. You're talking about ultimate truth. You're talking about heaven. You're not talking about earth. You're talking about heaven. Now, we Christians say, well, yeah, that's how we know what's right and wrong on earth is but if you're not going to do that, if you're going to say, oh, it's like, okay, supposing we play a game, and next Sunday let's come to church and let's not mention God or anything religious. Let's have an entire service and not mention God or anything religious. Well, what are we going to talk about? Bowling. Okay, that's about it. I don't know what else. So if we're going to gather together and we're going to adopt this position where all we're going to talk about is things down here, we're not going to talk about anything up there, okay, well then you can't talk about Jesus, and you can't talk about God, you can't talk about the Ten Commandments as something emanating from God. I can only talk about you and me and what you want, what I want. And so what we end up talking about is people being who they are and sort of validating one another's feelings. Now, it could go in different ways, but however it goes, it's all vested in the individual. Now, understand that our culture's preoccupation today with people being authentic, being themselves, having their own truths, living their own truth, and so on like that, and that being very hurt, being, getting their feelings hurt whenever anybody doesn't validate what you say you are. You understand what I'm talking about?
No.
Pardon me? Watch TV. Don't watch TV. If you actually haven't heard of this, blessed, you are blessed. Okay. If the moral center is going to be all about validating one another and being true to ourselves, then what does that make Christianity look like? It makes it look bad. mean, authoritarian, bigoted, backward, because Christianity, from the get-go, is telling people how they're supposed to be. I mean, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to figure out for yourself who you are, and then I'm supposed to validate that. But Christianity just says, forget all that. You're all a bunch of sinful reprobates. Let me tell you your hope, and your hope is in God, and your hope is in Christ. And so I'm going to tell you why, even though we're sinful reprobates, we still have hope. But it's all about God. The whole thing is about God. Your life, its meaning, its purpose, all is about God. So I'm not validating anybody, am I? I mean, I might validate you. You feel sinful like you're going to hell? Well, you should. That's exactly what you should feel. But I'm going to tell you why you're not going to hell. And it's because of Christ. It's not because you're really a good person. It's because of Christ. Christ will overcome that. It's all about Jesus. Because in the Judeo-Christian worldview, we're not secular. I mean, we deal with the secular because we live here. Right? Religion is about life down here. But it is life informed from God. Now, but if you walk into a church and your attitude is, I am who I am, and I figured out who I am, and it's important that everybody validate who I am, and you sit down in church thinking that people are going to say God is love and he loves you the way you are and all that, and then all of a sudden you start hearing a sermon about how you're sinful and you need to amend your sinful life, but Jesus is here to help you and all of that. That's the opposite of what you expect to hear, and that makes Christians seem mean. Okay? In our society, Christians seem opinionated and mean. Now, I wonder if I have... Okay. If we are going to maintain a secular society, if this is what we mean by that, we're going to try to be agnostic with respect to religion. Understand that. This means much, much more than we're just not going to talk about Jesus. Okay? If it was just we're not going to talk about Jesus, I'll tell you how that could be arranged. Once upon a time it used to be that in public schools, in some places like up north, for example, there would be, school would break early every Wednesday, and all the different kids, buses would come by and take the kids to the various churches, the Lutheran church, the Catholic church, the Baptist church, and they would receive religious instruction there. Or they would have clergy come in. And that was fine. That's the time to talk about Jesus. We're not going to talk about Jesus at the other times, okay, because we're trying to be fair. So we're going to open up to everybody. We're going to make it available for all your churches to talk about Jesus the way you want to talk about Jesus. And if you're a Jew, then you won't talk about Jesus. You'll talk about Moses. Fine. Okay. Maintaining a secularist neutrality the way we do it, with this agnosticism regarding God, period, it doesn't just mean we don't talk about Jesus. What it means is we are creating a generation of people resistant to the gospel. It is hard to convince somebody of Jesus who has been taught from when they were little that we don't know. That when it comes to religion, we don't know. We just can't say, I'm not against it. I value it. And I value this too. Everything is always this and that. And so what you're really saying is there's no particular truth in Christianity, okay, that I can just say is a fact. And so what we do is, if you're raised in that situation, it may be that nobody ever said an anti-Christian thing to you in your entire life. But they have built up in you a hard shell of resistance because I can't preach to you Jesus while you at the same time are saying, yeah, but about things religious, we just can't say. Okay? Agnosticism is a form of unbelief. It is much, much more closely related to atheism than Christianity. Okay? It is not a halfway house. And our society is trying to be agnostic and therefore sort of dedicated to a form of unbelief. All right, let's pray. Lord Jesus, we ask for your help, Lord, as we start a school here in this place that we are here, Lord, not only to teach about Jesus, but also to give to our children a worldview that is not resistant to Jesus, that will allow them to open their ears and open their hearts to the truth. We pray, Lord, that not only will we teach them a world where Jesus fits, but we will also teach them Jesus himself. And we pray that in our own church and in our own lives, we would not only believe in you, Lord Jesus, but in the world that you fit in, the world that you've given to us, the world that you created. Amen.